You don't look like any judge I've ever seen! Stop pretending.
Ma'am, the sign says it's reserved for a judge. I'm asking you politely to move your car.
Don't you raise your voice at me! You people think you can do anything!
Everything is being recorded, ma'am.
It started with a single bad decision. One woman's arrogance colliding with the wrong man at the wrong place. A quiet courthouse parking lot. Bright afternoon sun. Nothing unusual until a white SUV rolled in and stopped right in front of a parking space with a big clear metal sign that read, "Reserved for Judge." The sign couldn't be missed. Yet the driver ignored it completely. She parked right there, stepped out confidently, and locked her car with a sharp beep that cut through the silence like a challenge. That woman's name was Joan, and in less than 30 minutes, her life would crumble in front of thousands of watching eyes. Before we continue, where are you watching this from? Drop it in the comments below. I love seeing how far these stories travel. And while you're here, make sure to subscribe. You won't want to miss what happens next. Now, back to the story. The courthouse lot had maybe 15 spaces in total. Half were for staff, the rest for visitors. The reserved for judge spot was in the center. Clearly marked, clearly off limits. But Joan didn't care. She wanted the best spot, the closest one to the entrance. She had 3 other empty spaces waiting for her in the back, but she decided rules were for everyone else, not her. She slammed her door, adjusted her sunglasses even though the sky was cloudy, and walked toward the courthouse entrance with a kind of attitude that said, "I do what I want." A few minutes later, another car, a black sedan, pulled into the lot. The driver parked behind Joan's SUV, pausing when he saw it sitting in his spot. He sighed quietly. You could almost see the thought in his head. Again? This wasn't the first time someone had ignored the sign. The man stepped out. Mid-40s. Calm. Dressed simply in slacks and a polo. He wasn't wearing a robe, but he didn't need one. Everyone inside the courthouse knew exactly who he was. Judge Henry Carter. A man known for fairness, patience, and a calm that never cracked under pressure. Henry stood there for a moment, hands on his hips, staring at Joan's car under the reserved for judge sign. He shook his head and started walking toward the entrance, probably planning to have security call the driver. But just as he reached the steps, the door swung open. Out came Joan, holding a folder in one hand, her purse on her shoulder, clearly in a hurry. Henry saw her and turned back. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't act angry. He simply asked her, politely, to move her car, explaining that the spot was reserved for a judge. Joan stopped walking. Her expression changed instantly. Surprise turned to disbelief, then to pure attitude. Her mouth tightened. Her eyes narrowed. She crossed her arms and stared at him like he'd just said something ridiculous. She didn't believe him. Even though he pointed straight at the sign, right above her car. Joan laughed and said something short and dismissive, the kind of response that told you she didn't plan on moving. To her, Henry was just another man trying to tell her what to do. That moment, caught later on CCTV, was the spark. From that second on, everything began to spiral. Henry stayed calm. He gestured toward the sign again, saying nothing rude, nothing heated. Joan, on the other hand, stepped closer. Her arms started waving. Her lips moved faster. Even without sound, the body language said it all. She was accusing him, belittling him, and refusing to listen. People inside the courthouse began to notice the commotion through the windows. 2 clerks paused by the glass. A security officer turned to look. No one stepped out yet. It still seemed like something small, something that would blow over. But Joan wasn't letting it go. She suddenly reached into her purse, pulled out her phone, and held it up to Henry's face, recording. She circled around him slowly, filming as she spoke. You could see her expression, part anger, part performance. She wanted an audience. Henry sighed, then calmly took out his own phone and started recording too. That made her furious. Joan's hand started shaking. She jabbed her finger toward him again and again, stepping closer with every word. You could tell she was raising her voice now. The courthouse doors opened slightly as one of the guards stepped out, watching from a distance. He didn't intervene yet, but the tension was obvious. At this point, Joan had drawn a line in the sand. She refused to move her car. She refused to listen. And worse, she didn't believe Henry was who he said he was. In her eyes, he couldn't be a judge, not him. He didn't look the part. She said something that made Henry's shoulders stiffen, a short, cutting remark that showed exactly what she thought of him. It wasn't about the parking spot anymore. It was about who she thought belonged in that spot. The air grew heavy. Henry didn't respond. He stayed still, phone in hand, just recording. He knew better than to argue. He'd dealt with people like this before. Angry, loud, sure they were right. But Joan was on another level. A few courthouse staff members came outside now, trying to calm things down. Joan spun toward them, shouting about being harassed, waving her phone around. She pointed at Henry, claiming he was lying, that he was trying to trick her. One of the staff members pointed at the sign. It's the judge's space, he explained gently. But Joan refused to even look. She just shook her head, repeating that she didn't believe it. The guard finally stepped closer and asked her to move her vehicle before it got towed. That only made her louder. She started yelling about discrimination, about unfair treatment, about her rights. Henry had already walked away at this point, heading back inside. He wasn't going to argue anymore. But Joan followed him, still shouting, still recording. When he reached the courthouse door, she tried to follow him inside, but the guard blocked her path. She kept yelling, demanding that Henry be stopped, saying he had threatened her. Everyone nearby just stared in disbelief. A second guard arrived, then a third. All of them surrounded Joan, asking her to calm down, to move her car, and to stop making a scene. She ignored them all. Meanwhile, inside, Henry calmly approached the courthouse administrator. He quietly explained what had happened, then looked out the window to where Joan was still arguing in the parking lot. He wasn't angry. He wasn't emotional. But something in his expression had changed, disappointment mixed with resolve. He'd handled plenty of disputes in court, but this one wasn't going to be brushed aside. He wanted everything documented. Out in the lot, Joan still refused to move. Her voice echoed off the walls. She had no idea that every word, every action, and every glare was being captured perfectly by the courthouse's high-definition CCTV cameras. Those recordings would later tell the truth better than any argument ever could. And soon, Joan's arrogance, her refusal to see the reality right in front of her, would cost her more than she ever imagined. The shouting in the parking lot wasn't just noise anymore, it was chaos. People had gathered by the courthouse windows. Some had stepped outside, standing quietly near the doors as Joan continued yelling. Her face was red, her voice sharp and echoing. She still believed she was the one being wronged. The security guards tried to calm her down. One of them pointed again to the sign, then to the building, explaining that the parking spot was for a judge. Joan laughed. She said something about how anyone can print a sign, and waved her phone around like proof of something. What she didn't know was that inside, Judge Henry wasn't ignoring her. He was doing exactly what judges do best. He was building a case. Henry spoke briefly with the courthouse administrator and a senior security officer. They reviewed the live CCTV feed on a nearby monitor. The camera caught everything: the way Joan had parked, how she ignored the sign, and how she had followed him, shouting and recording. It was all there, from start to finish, in crystal clear video. Henry stayed calm. He didn't ask for her to be arrested. He didn't even want her removed right away. He wanted everything handled officially. That meant witnesses, reports, and documentation. Outside, Joan had crossed her arms, standing in front of her SUV like she was guarding it from being towed. Her whole body screamed defiance. When one of the guards asked her again to move the car, she shook her head. "No," she snapped. "I'm not moving until that man apologizes." That man, the judge, was watching from the window above her. A few minutes later, the back door opened again. Henry stepped out, this time not alone. With him was another judge, an older man with white hair and a calm but serious look on his face. Behind them were two administrators and the head of security. Joan turned when she heard the door. The instant she saw Henry, she started talking again, fast and loud. She pointed at him, her voice rising. She told the older judge that Henry had been harassing her, that he was trying to claim a parking spot that didn't belong to him. The older judge didn't say anything at first. He simply looked at the reserved for judge sign, then back at Henry, then at Joan. His eyes narrowed slightly. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady and measured, the kind of tone that cuts through noise without needing to be loud. He explained, clearly and directly, that Henry was indeed a judge, and not just any judge, but one who had worked there for years. The space she was standing in front of was his. The sign wasn't fake. It wasn't new. It had been there for nearly a decade. The shift on Joan's face was instant. The color drained from her cheeks. Her lips parted slightly as the truth hit her. You could almost see the realization settling in, that the man she had been screaming at, accusing, and disrespecting was exactly who he said he was. The people watching from the windows could feel it too. The air seemed to change. Joan tried to talk her way out of it. She laughed nervously, saying it was just a misunderstanding. She said she didn't know. She said if he had told her sooner, she would have moved right away. But the CCTV footage, the staff, and the guards all knew that wasn't true. He had told her. She just hadn't wanted to listen. Henry didn't gloat. He didn't smile. He just stood quietly, listening to her excuses. When she finally stopped talking, the senior judge stepped forward and said something short and firm. Whatever it was, it made Joan flinch. She turned and practically ran to her SUV. Her hands trembled as she unlocked the door. She started the engine so fast she nearly hit the curb backing out. The whole parking lot watched as she drove to a regular space at the far end of the lot, parked again, and sat there with her head bowed. For a moment, everything was silent again. But Henry wasn't done. Not out of anger, out of principle. He walked back inside with the other judge and the staff. They spent the next few minutes filing an official report. The security team downloaded the CCTV footage and attached it to the case file. Everything was carefully documented: time, actions, witnesses, and recordings. Meanwhile, Joan sat in her car, staring at her phone. You could see her arguing with herself, texting someone, scrolling, shaking her head. Maybe she thought it would all blow over now that she'd moved. But it didn't. 20 minutes later, a blue and white police car pulled into the lot. 2 officers stepped out and went inside the courthouse. Everyone watching through the windows knew exactly why they were there. Joan looked up, eyes wide. She saw them through her windscreen. She started her car again like she might leave, but it was too late. The officers came back out with a courthouse staff member who pointed directly at Joan's SUV. They approached slowly. She rolled down her window, trying to sound calm. The officers spoke to her quietly, their tone professional but firm. She shook her head, waved her phone again, and tried to explain. One officer leaned down, listening, then spoke for a while. After that, he stood straight, took out his notebook, and began writing. Joan's face fell. Her eyes welled up. She wasn't shouting anymore. A few minutes later, he tore a piece of paper from his pad and handed it to her, a citation. The exact words weren't announced in the lot, but it was clear enough. Joan had been cited for trespassing in a restricted parking area and for disorderly conduct. It wasn't an arrest, but it was official. Joan sat in her SUV, frozen. The officers walked back to their car and drove away. Inside, Henry watched silently. Not happy, not smug, just tired. He'd seen this kind of thing before, though not always this public. He went back to his office, finished his paperwork, and left for the day. But the story didn't end there. The courthouse administrator, who had worked there for more than 20 years, filed an additional complaint on behalf of the courthouse staff, describing Joan's behavior as disruptive and disrespectful toward court officials. That meant the footage, the witnesses, and the full report would be reviewed by city officials. Within 48 hours, the story started spreading. A courthouse employee, frustrated by what they'd witnessed, mentioned it on a private Facebook post. The post got shared. Then local news picked it up. The headline was simple but powerful. Woman harasses judge in his own parking spot. Photos from the security footage appeared blurred but recognizable. The story went viral. Joan's name came out a few days later when the police report became public record. By then, her life had already started to fall apart. People at her workplace recognized her. Her boss called her in for a meeting. Clients who saw the story started calling to complain. The company released a statement that they did not support discriminatory behavior, and just like that, Joan was suspended, then fired. Her phone blew up with messages, most of them angry. Her social media pages filled with comments calling her out. She tried to defend herself, saying she'd been set up or misunderstood, but the videos told the truth too clearly. And through it all, Henry said nothing publicly. He didn't give interviews. He didn't post about it. He didn't need to. His calm handling of the entire situation spoke louder than any statement could. He let the evidence and the system do the work. But behind the scenes, something else was happening, something Joan never expected. Henry's lawyer filed a civil suit against her for harassment and defamation, supported by every second of that CCTV footage. And this time, there was no escaping it. When the lawsuit papers reached Joan's mailbox, she froze. It was early morning, and the sound of the envelope tearing open seemed louder than usual. She scanned the words once, twice, 3 times, her hands shaking. Judge Henry Carter versus Joan Miller. Harassment, defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress. Her knees almost gave out. It wasn't a prank. It wasn't something she could talk her way out of. It was real, and she had brought it on herself. The lawsuit made everything public again. News outlets jumped on the story a second time, this time with court documents confirming that Joan wasn't just being cited, she was being sued. At first, Joan tried to fight back. She hired a lawyer, someone she thought could fix the situation. She claimed she was the real victim, that Henry had provoked her, and that he had used his position to make her look bad. But the moment the courthouse released the CCTV footage, that defense crumbled. The video showed everything. Her walking past the reserved for judge sign, her ignoring his calm gestures, her following him while shouting, and her standing in front of her car refusing to move. Every detail, every expression, every word she'd thrown out in anger was there for the world to see. No editing, no excuses, just truth. The judge handling the case watched the footage silently. When it ended, he simply leaned back and said, "I think we've seen enough." Joan's lawyer looked defeated. They advised her to settle. She didn't want to. Her pride told her she could still win somehow, that maybe the internet would forget. But the internet never forgets. Local papers ran the headline again. Woman who harassed black judge faces lawsuit. It was everywhere. Facebook, YouTube, TikTok. The video clips racked up millions of views. People commented things like, "She picked the wrong person to mess with," and justice really parked itself this time. Joan stopped going out in public for weeks. Her friends avoided her. Her neighbors whispered. Even grocery store trips became humiliating. People recognized her from the story. At work, She'd already been terminated. The company released a short public statement. We hold all employees to a standard of respect and professionalism. We do not condone discriminatory or harassing behavior. That one line was the final nail in her career. Meanwhile, Henry continued working as usual. His courtroom stayed busy. He greeted everyone the same way he always had: kind, patient, and respectful. People admired him even more now. Not because he had power, but because of how he used it, with calm and dignity. When reporters tried to reach him for interviews, he declined. The only statement came from his lawyer. Judge Carter hopes this incident serves as a reminder that actions have consequences and that respect should never depend on appearance. In the weeks that followed, the civil case moved quietly but steadily. Joan eventually agreed to a settlement. The exact amount wasn't shared publicly, but it was significant, enough to hurt, enough to teach. But the money wasn't the worst part. The real punishment was the loss of reputation. Every search of her name brought up the same story. Employers saw it. Neighbors saw it. Even her extended family saw it. Her social media accounts went private, then disappeared. And yet, people still remembered. Months later, a local TV station aired a short follow-up segment titled "Courthouse Confrontation Sparks Change." In it, they showed how the courthouse had improved its security measures. Clearer signs for restricted parking. Extra CCTV coverage. Updated training for handling public disputes. The clip ended with Henry speaking briefly, his first and only interview. He didn't mention Joan's name. Instead, he talked about what he'd learned from the experience. He said, "The moment we start assuming who someone is based on how they look, we stop seeing people as people. That's when injustice begins, not in courtrooms, but in everyday moments like in a parking lot." That single quote went viral again. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was true. Meanwhile, Joan had moved out of town. Friends who once knew her said she became quiet and withdrawn. She stopped using social media altogether. No one saw her at community events or social gatherings anymore. It was as if she had vanished. But she hadn't disappeared completely. One morning, nearly 6 months later, a local journalist managed to contact her for a short comment. Joan didn't want to go on camera, but she sent a short message through her lawyer. "Greater than, I regret what happened. I let my emotions and assumptions take over. I wish I could take it back." It wasn't much, but it was something. For Henry, life went on smoothly. The courthouse community respected him even more. His colleagues called him a model of patience and professionalism. New judges in training were even shown the CCTV footage as a lesson in de-escalation and dignity. The incident became a teaching tool, used in seminars, police workshops, and diversity sessions. People who saw it didn't just see a parking lot argument. They saw what prejudice and pride can cost a person. They saw how calmness, truth, and evidence can defeat arrogance without a single raised voice. As for Joan's old SUV, the one she had parked in the wrong spot, it was sold months later. Whoever bought it probably never knew what had happened in that vehicle's past. But the courthouse cameras did. They were still there, still recording, still watching over the same quiet lot. Every now and then, new visitors to the courthouse would pause before parking, noticing that big, clear metal sign, "Reserved for Judge." They'd double-check before stepping out, making sure they were in the right place. No one wanted to make the same mistake. Everyone in town knew the story by now. It wasn't just gossip, it was a warning. Respect isn't optional, and assumptions can ruin lives. Joan learned that the hard way. She lost her reputation, her job, and her peace of mind, all because she couldn't see past her own pride and prejudice. And Henry? He didn't just win a lawsuit. He proved something far more powerful. That real strength isn't in shouting, or fighting, or embarrassing someone back. Real strength is in staying calm, recording the truth, and letting justice do its job. So, in the end, Joan didn't just lose a parking space. She lost everything that arrogance makes you believe you can't lose: respect, credibility, and control. And that courthouse camera, it's still there waiting, watching, reminding everyone who walks by that one moment of anger can rewrite your entire life. Justice doesn't always happen in the courtroom. Sometimes it starts in a parking lot.